This is the Superman #1 from 1939. And this is the 1940 Batman #1. Hi there, I'm Roswell Ncita, Chief Communications Officer for the Library of Congress, and get ready to nerd out. The Library of Congress has one of the largest comic book collections with titles dating back more than 80 years with superheroes from then and now. So it is our honor to welcome 5 extraordinary talents of the comic book industry. Legendary publisher and Chief Creative Officer of DC Comics, Jim Lee, illustrator Bernard Chang, writers Sarah Kuhn and Minh Lê, and former National Ambassador for Young People's Literature, Luen. We all have one thing in common. We started drawing superheroes and comics when we were kids. They became brilliant talents and titans of the industry. My drawings stayed in my childhood desk drawer. They are joining us as part of the library's Behind the Book series, where we'll talk about their inspirations, how their Asian heritage influenced them, and how their talents allowed them to soar in this fascinating field. The Library of Congress is celebrating the rich diversity of America with this program in observance of Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. For more of our literary events, visit loc.gov/engage. Thank you, and here's your moderator for today, best-selling author and artist, Jean Luen Yang. Jean?
Thank you, Roswell, and thank you all for joining me here today. Thank you to the Library of Congress for hosting this event. I am so excited to be here with you all today because I get to introduce you all to Jim Lee. Jim Lee is a world-renowned comic book artist, writer, editor, and publisher. He is currently the Chief Creative Officer of DC Comics. He is also the publisher of the company. Since becoming publisher in 2010, Jim has overseen many of the company's most successful publishing programs, including the recent record-breaking Rebirth line of comics and the New 52 initiative, which rebooted the entire DC universe. He is a legend in American comics. Jim has received numerous awards and accolades, including a Harvey Award, an Inkpot Award, Diamond Gemstone Awards, and Wizard Fan Awards. Most importantly, Jim is an incredible inspiration to countless of us in American comics, including me. Let's welcome Jim to the virtual stage.
Thank you for that amazing introduction. And the feeling is mutual. Likewise, for sure, Gene. I just want you to know you're a hero of mine, and your successes are amazing as well. And I'm just excited to actually see you again. It's been a while, so.
Yeah, it's been a while. I have to tell you, one of the reasons why I said yes to this event is because I feel like it gives me the chance to say things to you that would be very awkward to say we're having like a meeting in your office, you know? So I feel like you mean a lot to me because many of my fondest memories from my teenage years with my younger brother have to do with you. It was me and him waiting in line at a local comic book convention in order to get your signature. And I don't want to get into too many details, but there was once an incident where he got to touch your sacred drawing pens, and you were always just super kind. You know, you were always super kind to these teenage nerds that waited to see you, and we were always incredibly impressed.
Well, look, I'll tell you this because I see myself in those young fans, and I think certainly when I got into the business, when I was drawing comics and stories, I was very much trying to tap into like the stuff that excited me as a younger reader, and trying to deliver that same sense of excitement and bringing that world, this mythology to life for other fans and sort of creating the next generation. And it's been a really awesome ride. I mean, it's moved so quickly at this point. I think 34 years at this point. Yeah, it's been awesome.
That's amazing. Well, I would like to dig in a little bit deeper.
Sure.
I'd like to start from your beginning. You know, every superhero has an origin story. So I would love to hear the Jim Lee origin story. Here's just the basics of what I know. You were born in South Korea, but you grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. What was your childhood like, and how exactly did you make your way into the American comic book community?
Yeah, I would say, my childhood seemed fairly normal to me. I had two loving parents, a younger sister, was born in South Korea, came to the United States when I was like 4.5, 5 years old. I didn't speak any English. Neither did my mother. My father was a resident. He was a doctor that was basically brought in because there was a shortage of physicians in the United States. And I think I gravitated towards escapism because the culture shock. I can only imagine like what that must have been like at that age, not understanding anything and seeing everything really differently. And but the one connection I did have when I was in Korea, there was a character called Hangubakchi. It was like this Korean skeleton with a cape. I remember that, and watching these Max Fleischer Superman cartoons, and being able to see Superman again in another country, I guess felt very familiar to me. But I just naturally gravitated towards comics because there wasn't a lot of nerd content in general. There was no Netflix, there was nothing, right? So you just had to wait for something to show up and catch that wave, so to speak. And comics were ubiquitous at the time. They were on every street corner, newspaper vendor. When I got my hair cut, and I think it was just like looking at the pictures that they were my form of entertainment. And they really inspired me to understand or teach myself English, right? So I can understand what these characters were saying. But like if you have a really great artist who can, if they're doing their job correctly, you should be able to understand the story without the words, right? So I got my stories through the pictures, but then it incentivized me to learn what they were actually saying. And I learned all the language that would explain what the white balloons, dialogue balloons meant. And then I graduated to the captions. And then I remember graduating to the letters columns, right? And reading all those because it was just a different kind of vocabulary. And I think it really taught me very early kind of like, oh, if you learn something, it unlocks some other cool thing. And that's something that has really, I think, kind of driven me or has been a part of my life ever since, right? And looking back on it.
Were there certain characters that you gravitated towards when you were young?
No, you know what? Again, it was like the Sahara of nerd, content. There wasn't a lot of stuff. So anything you saw, whether it was Casper the Friendly Ghost or Archie comics or movies about giant insects, I consumed as much and all of it as much as possible. And I think again there was just a lot of comic books at the time. And I remember, hanging out with like neighborhood kids on our banana bikes and just, which I would never let my kids do today. Like, I would just go out when, during the day and I would return when the sun set. And then my parents had no idea where I was. And frankly, I looked at some old maps and I was trying to trace my footsteps of where I would go hang out. It was miles that I'd be riding on my bike, and I was like, 12 years old, 10, 12, Anyway, but there was always like an older kid that had a box of comics and they were just piled in there like in one big box, and we would like kind of dive through and he'd give us the ones that he was bored of and then we would trade them amongst ourselves. And so it was kind of a cool hobby, but I always drew too. That was the other thing. When I was even in Korea, when I was like 4 years old, I had an art tutor that came in and we'd learn how to draw, or she taught me how to draw in oil pastels. So seeing the content, reading the stories, really fed my sort of creative passion for drawing. And so I spent a lot of time just drawing my favorite scenes or my favorite characters. And again, it was great escapist fare, like just disappearing into another world. And again, I think, it brought probably a lot of comfort and to me as I was growing up in this sort of strange new world.
Mm-hmm. I think it was the same for me too. Comic books and the escapism they offered and really the stories they told helped me find my place in the world, being in between cultures. I think these stories about characters who have two different identities were super important to me.
For sure. Yeah. And also I think that you could have something that feels like a curse, but it actually ends up being a blessing or a secret power later on. That's something that really kind of appealed to me. And, it's not that I had endured a lot of like, prejudice or abuse or anything, but you do feel like you're an outsider. You were treated like as an outsider. And I think that also fed my creative passions for drawing because, I was really, and I think still am, pretty observant, right? You're always watching other people. Like, how do I fit in? How do I stand? What are they wearing? Like, how do I like become more like them so I don't stand out like this weird, kid that came in from another country. And so I think that's something that, really kind of heightened my observational powers. And so when I draw, I'm pulling from memory and pulling from life experiences, things that I've just sort of, oh, when people are, annoyed, this is kind of the body language that they have, or so like I felt that was a piece of kind of my creative upbringing.
That's a great point. I actually had never thought about that, how being an outsider really does train your observation skills, but it's totally true. It's absolutely true. When did you start thinking about making your own comic books? When did you start making your own comic books?
Oh, I think I was drawing since, I was like 5 years old. I certainly in grade school, I thought I was ready to break into the pros. It was pretty sad. I think I was like, 9 or 10, and I mailed a half finished Hulk drawing to Marvel and thinking they would hire me, but I think later, like when I was like, junior or senior in high school, I started drawing comics, my own stories, and I was doing on typewriter paper because that's the only paper I had. I didn't know that. Well, yeah, I didn't know I didn't know how comics were made, right? So I was, do the credits box and go written by, at the time my name was Young Lee, that was my given name, right? Penciled by Young Lee, inked by Young Lee, colored by Young Lee, lettered by. I was like really a narcissistic. I obviously, exercise. I could have just said comic by, but anyway. So that was. I remember definitely trying my hand at it, but I was not disciplined, and I didn't really get the discipline until I was like 21 or 22. And I think that's usually a kind of a pivotal age I see in a lot of young aspiring artists. Like the desire exceeds your ability and your discipline when you're younger, and then at a certain point as you mature, you are able to focus and commit and actually finish something. And so I didn't really finish a comic book story, I think, until I actually got an assignment from Marvel when I was like 21 or 22. Everything I was kind of half finished because I would either lose interest or I think I just lost interest. I wasn't as focused as finishing a complete story. And that kind of speaks to the fact that I'm not really a writer. It's, I wasn't really focused on beginning, middle, and end. It was more about like, oh, this would be kind of fun to draw and bring to life. And then when I got tired with it, I would just kind of move on to the next idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to dig into that choice that you just talked about, the choice of actually entering into the comic book industry as an artist at Marvel. You have immigrant parents. I think it's safe to say that no immigrant parent dreams of their kid getting into comic books. So what was that like? What was it like to make that decision? What was it like to tell your parents that you made that decision? What were the circumstances around that decision?
Were your parents supportive of your decision?
No.
Okay,
no.
Right. I'm doing a spontaneous survey. Like so far, it's 0 and 8,928, I believe, against. Yes, it was not a popular decision at the household. I went to college. I got a degree in psychology. My father was a physician, like I said, and they really came to the United States. They were the first of the extended family. They were the pioneers of the family to move to a strange new country for the American dream. And that was fully what they expected me to do. And I returned this awesome sacrifice and favor by basically saying, that's not what I want. The American spirit is in me, and I'm going to do what I think is right. And I love comic books. And I just, for whatever reason, I just had this burning passion to become a comic book artist. And obviously I love the characters and the stories, and that was a big piece of it. But I think also, I think there was some, desire, some individualism that was sort of coming out that hey, this is what I want to do, and it's not necessarily what you want me to do. And I think that was like the only time we had a really major rift. But after they saw like how intent I was on this dream, the number of hours I was putting into drawing every single day after I graduated college and moved back into my childhood bedroom, set up a drawing table. I would like roll out of bed, right onto the chair, start drawing. I would draw like 10, 12 hours a day, every single day, till my knuckles were sore and I had to put them under hot water. I pinched a nerve. My father got me a brace. So they saw that I was really driven. This is what I wanted to do. But once I got the work, they were actually my biggest champions. I mean, they never asked me again about applying to medical school, and they were super supportive. Even when I was first, like my very first year in comics, I think they were just really fearful that I would be the proverbial sort of starving artist, and I would never realize my dream and be able to make a living at it. And once they saw that someone could get paid for doing this, because they knew nothing about it as well, right? They were pretty happy, and they became relentless, I think, in their support. Like, we go to a Chinese restaurant and they pull the waiter over and go like, yeah, our son, what he does? He draws this comic book, and they bring home comic books from the ER for me to sign for like the nurses that were also comic book fans. So, it's like, can we just save this for Comic Cons? Is that possible? Like, can I have some private life? No, so, it was great. They were very supportive, for sure.
So that was one of your really radical decisions, the decision to actually enter into the comic book industry. But once you got in, I felt like you did not follow the standard career path. I think the standard career path for an artist is to work at one of the big two companies, either Marvel or DC, right? And really try to attach your name to a character and do a couple of epic runs on that character. Right. But you did that. You did an epic run on Punisher and an epic run on X-Men. I have all of those comics at home somewhere in a long box. But then you did this other radical decision. You made the decision to make this jump from fan favorite artist to entrepreneur. And that's the other decision I'd like to ask you about. Like, what prompted that? What made you make that decision? Because I felt like you were at a place where it seemed like you had you got to a position that was very difficult to get to, the fan favorite artist, and to move from there to something much riskier, like being an entrepreneur, must have been difficult.
Yeah, I think the same impulsive behavior or impulsive instinct that made me kind of give up. All right, I've got this degree. I took my MCATs. I took like organic chemistry. I had all my recommendations for medical school, and I remember thinking like, wow, if I get on this escalator, 4 years from now, I will be out of medical school. Another 4 years, I'll have done my internship and residency. Another 8 years of specialization or whatever, and I'll come off the top of this escalator and be this thing, and that will be the start of my career as a doctor or whatever, surgeon, whatever I was thinking. And it seemed like putting life off for that long and not having any spontaneity for, moving away from that path seemed it didn't seem attractive at all, right? And so I think when I got into comics, part of it was that was all novel. I was learning as I was doing it. They hired me before I was really any good, honestly, and I was learning on the job. But then I think that natural curiosity, that's something I learned in high school and college, is what kind of drove me to keep pushing and learning about the rest of the industry. Like, all right, well, if I do my art here, how do I make this art better? Well, I can work with a greater or more experienced inker. If I work with a really good colorist, they'll heighten that, what the art looks like. So you see the value in working with like the very best creators like that. And then a great writer can elevate your art as well. Well, what does an editor do? What does a salesperson do? What does a publicist do? They all enhance the quality or the ability to sell or market the story you're creating. And so just learning about the rest of the business kind of fed itself. And I wanted to know more. And then ultimately that led to, well, what happens if I leave this and do something new? What is on the other side of this? And what is sort of unlocked by kind of fearlessly kind of jumping off this cliff? And then, like I was 27, 28, something like that. And I think when you're younger, you either think you know everything or you feel like you're invulnerable. And so that also played a role in it, I think. And so all that together, it didn't seem like a big choice to me though, honestly. I mean, I think at the time I felt like it always could come back, I think. But at the end of the day, I was more enticed by the unknown than what I'd already kind of created or sort of understood. And, wanting to understand like, all right, what happens if I do my own comics? How do I create an infrastructure or a business or a team to help kind of unlock the content I'm creating? And man, I learned on the job too. I think every year I've been in the industry, I've kind of learned different things, and that's what's kept me engaged and interested in what I do.
Well, just to describe exactly what you did, you founded Image Comics, which is now one of the biggest comic book companies in America. And then your piece of that, Wildstorm Productions, was the home of all of these characters that are still around today. You know, decades later, they're still a vital part of stories that are being read by characters today. Incredibly radical. Both of these decisions, I think, are just mind-blowingly radical. I do want to ask, like, did you ever feel any fear when you made these decisions? And if so, how'd you deal with that?
Yeah, I think I'm a pretty analytical person, right? So I feel like there's the creative side of things, and then even the way I approach art, I think of it a lot of times mathematically and sort of through geometry rather than the emotional side of things, and that's something I always have to think about and weigh and make sure I bring the emotion into the art as much as the sort of the technical aspects of it. For me, I think it was just really a exercise of, what are the odds? What are the risks? And just, deconstructing the fear aspect of it. What am I actually fearful of, right? That I'll be embarrassed, that I'll, make less money, or I'll fall flat on my face and have to come, so there are all these things that ran through my head, and it was just like, all right, what's the likelihood of all that? So I think that's a way of kind of minimizing or reducing fear. Then again, the other part of it, I was young, and I think there's something exhilarating about doing something that people haven't done before. And then I also had all compadres. I had all these other people that I wasn't doing it by myself. So I didn't feel like I was insane, right? Like, oh, these other people think it's a good idea, then maybe it is a really good idea. So, people like Todd McFarlane or Mark Silvestri were instrumental in kind of, you can create like a momentum by talking to your friends. And that's what we did. I mean, part of the genesis of Image Comics was because each of us were working essentially more or less alone or with one or two friends in different pockets of the United States. And you've got hours of downtime where you're drawing these stories. And we put on these like, telemarketer headsets, with a microphone, and we just call each other up and spend hours talking to each other while we're drawing the stories. And out of that came a bond, and just like, what if we were to all rally or bond together? What could we do? And that was really exciting. It's like, well, let's find out. Like, who knows? And I think that's, that is a hallmark of being young, right? Young and stupid, right? In some ways, right? It's just willing to take those risks. You don't necessarily think of the implications or consequences of failure, because why would you, right? And so I think the timing just aligned it, and the people and the situation, so it didn't feel like a scary situation at all, to be honest.
Well, that's some great advice. So thinking through your risks, weighing what those risks are, and relying on your friends in order to get through.
Yeah, there you go. That's a much more succinct answer. That's it.
That's great. Well, now the time has come for me to invite one of my fellow Jim Lee fans up onto the virtual stage. Bernard Chang is a superstar comic book artist and designer. He's best known for his work in the comic book industry and in the entertainment design industry. He used to be a Walt Disney Imagineer, which means he got to design rides and attractions. Bernard broke into the comic book industry in 1992 at the tender age of 20. He was quickly voted as one of Wizard's fan favorite artists. He made the top 10 artists list. And then he was also nominated for the Russ Manning Award during his first year in the industry. Since then, he's drawn many critically acclaimed books, including Wonder Woman, Superman, Green Lantern, and Teen Titans. So let's welcome Bernard Chang, assuming he can find a parking space.
Yeah, I think there's one over here. All right, let me pull over. Gene, I better give me 5 stars after this.
Oh, I'm giving you 5 stars.
Jim, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be sitting down and chatting with you. I've always been a tremendous fan, even as a professional. Whenever I'm around you, I really fanboy out. So you have to excuse my sensitivity towards how awesome I think you are. I want to talk a little bit today about artistic process. And, I know you went through Princeton. You were almost going to head towards a career as in the medical profession. But then all of a sudden, you took a turn to dive into the comic book field. Like, as a young artist, were there any, can you talk about some of the struggles you might have had, or maybe some doubts or issues that you were fighting, or was it just smooth coasting all the way?
No, the thing I remember most about the early years, Bernard, is just this overriding need to draw. Like I was drawing like every single day, every holiday. I like cleaning the house. One time I found like an old voucher, or it was like a summation of all the work I did in one year at Marvel. It was like 240 pages of pencils and like 80 pages of inks that I vouchered for, and I'm like, wow, that's a lot. That's a lot. I mean, so I think it was it was such a big dream of mine, and I'd worked so hard to like break in a weird way. Like maybe I felt like if I stop, it will go away. It will disappear like some weird dream. And so I think I was like really obsessed with the need to draw, and I guess maybe entertain or impress the audience with the work I was creating. There wasn't the internet obviously back then, so there was a feedback loop, right? You go to conventions and you meet the fans, and it'd be like months after, and there's only a couple of conventions, or a lot fewer conventions, so there was only these few regular moments where you can interact with your audience. And so in a weird way, I think I always had them in my mind as I was creating this content, these stories. And it was just seeing the reaction and the feedback from the fans kind of grow with every new project. It just kept reinforcing itself. And so the excitement I saw in the fans fueled my desire to create, more work and work on bigger characters. And again, I was telling Gene, like learning about the craft, learning about the business was something that, again, really sort of inspired and drove me. So it wasn't always just about finishing pages. It was finishing pages in service of a storyline, or finishing pages in service of working with another creative that I've always wanted to work with, right? And then just meeting new people within the industry, whether they worked as an executive, a staffer, or other artists, and learning from them. Like I used to bug other artists all the time at every Comic-Con, like, what tools do you use? Like how do you compose your pages? Like everything was like this incredible learning experience that was on 24/7. And that's kind of what I remember from the very sort of the first phase of my career, I guess. So it really drove me for many, many years.
Where do you, is there something that, that when you were a kid that helped build that particular sense of discipline, or observation, or just curiosity?
I think curiosity is a big thing. I certainly in high school and college, it was always about, okay, you need to learn the content, but what will serve you better in life is understanding how to communicate, how to do your research and put thoughts together. But ultimately, curiosity is something that is probably the most valuable thing you can sort of instill in yourself, because with curiosity, you'll become a self-propelling machine in a way. Like that's how you will learn, that's how you will improve and get better. And I think even from my earliest memories, like learning English unlocked all this stuff. And so to me, like if I can draw well, that will unlock a career, and I will unlock working with this person or working on this character. And if I so it kind of fed itself. But I think I've just always been curious and kind of obsessive in a way. I was really into like Dungeons and Dragons as a kid too, and I would make my own adventures and maps, and then lists of NPCs and their backstories. And I found this stuff in a box in my garage. I'm like, what was wrong with me? Like, my parents probably looked at me like, what is he doing? Why is he doing this? But it was just, I think it was, I just love these worlds, and whether you create them with numbers or pictures, it's just something that brought me a lot of, creative, satisfaction. And so that was really a big part of it.
You also mentioned about digging into boxes, and for this thing, I went and dug into my
Oh yeah.
long boxes, and
Yeah.
this book here, Alpha Flight number 51. when I was collecting comics as a teenager in Miami, I'd get like comics mailed to me, subscription through Marvel, but then I also go to the comic book store about once a month to pick up any specials. And I remember flipping through this book when I got in the mail, taking out the brown bag that it was in, and just looking at the artwork instantly drew me in. And I knew that there was something different. It was different. This was your first Marvel book, right?
That's right.
And I remember after flipping through the book, looking back in the front and seeing this guy, Jim Lee. And I was like, Back then there was no internet. So there was no way to like really know who you were and connect the face with the work. Was there something like when this book first came out, what was going on in your head and in your life at that time?
Yeah, I think I was just happy to get my first assignment, and I thought I was going to get a new universe title. That was what Marvel was publishing at the time, and I was like, I'll take DP7, whatever, Star Brand. I just wanted to get my foot in the door, and the fact that I got Alpha Flight, they're mutants. I mean, they're Canadian mutants, whatever, but they're still mutants, and they tied into X-Men, which was my favorite book growing up, right? And so I was just really I counted myself very fortunate that I was working on characters that were meaningful to me. So even when I worked on that first issue, they had introduced a whole new team of Alpha Flight members, and they weren't recognizable to me. But I was still happy to work on a prestigious title like that. And like I said, I was learning on the job. I in my head, I'm sure I was thinking like, oh, this will really impress the fans. I'm going to give them all this detail and action and put my heart into every single line or every single drawing panel. And but looking back on it, obviously I was learning on the job, and what I had in my head wasn't necessarily what I could bring to life through the actual work itself, but the desire and the imagery was there. I just couldn't get it from here to the page just yet.
Well, thank you.
No problem.
All right, well, it's time to invite another Jim Lee fan up onto the virtual stage. Minh Lê is the author of the graphic novel Green Lantern Legacy, which came out from DC Comics last year. He also writes picture books. He wrote Drawn Together, which was illustrated by Dan Santat, and it was the winner of the 2019 Asian Pacific American Award for Literature. He did Lift as well with Dan Santat. In addition to writing books, Minh has written for a number of national publications, including the New York Times, the Huffington Post, and NPR. Welcome, Minh.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Hey, man. Hey,
how's it going?
Yeah.
I love that we're just kind of taking turns coming up and fanning out and then trying to embarrass you. So I guess it's my turn because I was thinking about this, and Gene mentioned your X-Men run earlier, and I have to confess that I spent so much time when I was in school trying to replicate your Wolverine instead of paying attention in class, and it was that was my education in junior high, just trying to recreate some of the stuff that you've been putting out. So it's really such an honor to get to chat with you like this.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I had the same experience. I was drawing all the time, grade school, high school. I would draw on the notebooks. The teachers would rip the paper or the notebooks from me. I would just draw straight onto the desks themselves, man. Like just whatever was driving me, I couldn't turn it off, I guess. Right. So we share that.
I wish I still had it, but I think I had a pair of pants that I was like doodling on, like a picture of Wolverine on the pants, and just totally ruined it. My parents like, you have paper, why don't you draw?
You're hardcore, man. I never thought about drawing on clothing. It had to be a flat, hard surface.
Well, maybe that's why my skills kind of petered out.
Right.
But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about like your role as a creator. Because one of the things I was interested in is that in your career, you've tackled like so many iconic characters. And so when you're working on that, how do you incorporate an individual's like rich history while also bringing something new and fresh to a character?
Yeah, for me, because some of these characters were like my friends growing up, my imaginary friends growing up, I remember just drawing them, and it was really about bringing them to life and understanding how gesture and body language are critical, I think, in bringing out personality, even if they're not saying a line of dialogue in that particular panel. I tried not to have people just kind of all stand in the same position, straight up and down, really try to bring their personality to life through the art. And there's like a panel in like X-Men 94, I think, or early on. But anyway, it's like the X-Men, they're all in the foyer of the X Mansion, and Professor X has brought them all there. And I think Wolverine is sitting there on the table, and he's got one claw out, and he's playing tic-tac-toe. He's like dug the claw into the table, you know, and I'm like, oh my gosh, he's trashing this fine piece of antique furniture. And he didn't have, if he was saying something, it had nothing to do with what he was doing. And to me, like, I don't know if that was in the script or not, but I think that's like, to me, like a classic example of how little things like that bring out the personality. And I just remember really responding to that. And so again, you know, you file that away as a reader and go like, when I draw these characters or any characters, I want to be able to kind of bring those moments to life in that same way. And I think that's how I approach these iconic characters, as, you know, what is the humanity inside them? What's the personality inside these characters, and how do I bring it to life through the visuals, even if the dialogue is slightly different?
Yeah, no, that's a great response. And I was kind of curious, on a related to that, but on a larger scale. Like, one of the big differences between DC Comics and like a more traditional publisher is that you're not just putting out books, but you're overseeing like a universe, right? So I mean, what are the challenges for you as a caretaker of something like a universe in that way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a balancing act that we need to do. Like, we are overseers, right? So there's that heavy responsibility, like the mantle, the weight of responsibility that you're curating or sort of, you know, safeguarding these characters that have been around for 80 plus years at this point, right? They're beloved. They are fixtures of pop culture. They are iconic all over the world. And but at the same time, we recognize that over the years, we've had to change them and update their mythology to keep them fresh and contemporary, right? So we can't just let them sit idle. They can't be frozen in amber. We have to intervene and kind of bring them into the present. How do we do that? What do we update? How do we update? And I think that's the balance we have to find. And so I think that is our primary challenge.
Yeah, and speaking of like that kind of like sense of refreshing and updating, New 52 is like one of like the most radical things to happen to the DC universe, and one of the biggest shifts in DC's history. Can you talk a little bit about like how that came about and what that was like?
Yeah, you know, I think that came out of a creative sort of symposium. We brought a lot of our creatives together in at New York Comic Con, right after New York Comic Con, I believe. And we were talking about what we were planning on doing with the characters going forward. And we just kind of talked about each individual character. And then when we got to Superman, we talked about kind of his situation, being married to Lois, and you know, talking about the early origins of that character and how there was this weird love triangle between Clark, who loved Lois, Lois who loved Superman, but Superman was Clark, right? And you know, how we could address that. And I think that's when the first idea, like, well, what happens if we kind of reboot the universe that would allow us to sort of tackle it from a fresh new perspective, even though we're revisiting kind of an old trope or an old sort of relationship. And then when we start talking about all the characters and what could be unlocked by, you know, kind of rebooting the universe, it just got everyone's sort of creative juices going, and this excitement and momentum built. And that's kind of what led to the genesis of New 52, sort of what cool creative stories could we tell if we were doing this, right? We didn't want to just do it, renumber it, because you know you're going to get a certain amount of, you know, buyer, you know, fan buy-in, and your sales will go up because you're doing new number ones. But we wanted to actually, you know, present a fresh creative take on these classic characters that have been around for many, many decades. And that was super exciting, and not just for the creative work, but it was also something that really unified and brought the entire company together. And on top of that, we decided to go day and date with our digital books. That pipeline had never been really built. That was a whole new way of creating and releasing content. So every single part of DC, from manufacturing and production to publicity to sales to distribution, editorial, of course, was involved, and it was a great unifier. It was just a great experience bringing that to life. And I think the first 2 years of it were just magical. Obviously, everything that we set out to do, we achieved. The numbers were incredible. We went back to press like I think 6 or 7 times on our first releases that came out. So seeing that kind of response from the fan base, seeing the excitement from the retailers was, it was magical and made us giddy. I think, it was just really, really awesome to be part of something big like that just really kind of reinvented DC.
Mhm. Yeah, I love hearing that kind of behind the scenes, and hearing how organic it felt, or it seems like that whole process was. Because when we think about the DC universe, a lot of times it feels very much like a living entity. And so I was wondering, when you think about its evolution, do you have any particular hopes for the future of DC Comics?
Yeah, I think, we've been, we're in the process, I think, of continuing to update, like going back to what I originally said about kind of the twin challenges, right? You want to preserve and curate and keep what's special about the characters, but at the same time, continually push them into the future, because I think if you don't, they can become sort of, nostalgic, products of yesteryear, and not what really defines and drives pop culture in the here and now. And when I think about our challenges or our opportunities, I would love for DC to be even more embraced by fans all around the world, right? Not just the North American market. And I think there's huge upside and opportunities in the global marketplace as we bring our characters to our fans everywhere. But at the same time, I think we owe it to our fans to continue to diversify, right? And make sure that our universe really reflects the diversity that we see in our readership all around the world, right? And that doesn't mean just sort of coming up with characters from this country and kind of checking the box. I think it's deeper than that. It's about finding, authentic voices from the countries themselves that and give them their break into mainstream comics, and teach them how our business works, and sort of the methodology of creating comics, and welcoming them into our creative community, right? So it's about diversifying our creative community as well. And I think, and then you have to really effectively do this. I think you need that also within your own company. I think the company itself needs to be more reflective of our aspirations. And I think, looking at DC now versus DC 10 years ago, the company is different. I think the product line, the stable of characters is different, but we still have a lot of work ahead of us. Like, how do we, I would love to create a bunch of South Korean characters, heroes and villains, not just one, but just a whole kind of sub corner of the DC universe. That would be really fun to kind of unlock and create. So I think there's a lot of great things and opportunities for us going forward. So I think that's the mindset that we all share right now.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's great. And personally, I just want to take a second to thank you, because I really appreciate how much care you've taken with not just individual characters, but kind of like the universe as a whole, and how much the role you've played in shaping the world of comics. I really appreciate that. And it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. Before I kick it to Dean.
Yeah, and thank you for creating Ty and bringing him into the Green Lantern family of characters. I mean, I don't know if there's been another Green Lantern that was like generational, right? That was passing within the family, and I think kind of that speaks to Asian, culture and heritage. And I think it was just a great way of kind of marrying two kind of big ideas together and getting something that's really unique and has really diversified, obviously, our mythology and brought us a really special character. So thank you for that.
Oh no, thank you for the opportunity. It's been an honor.
Well, I'm a big Green Lantern Legacy fan as well. That book has made its rounds in our family over and over and over again.
I was gonna say, like our content comes from everywhere, right? I mean, obviously there's the stuff that we produce in-house through the publishing line, but Harley Quinn was created in the Batman, the animated series, and when there's a good idea, it doesn't matter where it comes from. And so I love the fact that that the character is actually part of the DC Festival of Heroes book. I want to just plug that for a second, right? So, spearheaded by our amazing editor, Jessica Chen. I think it's out in May, but like, it's an anthology of all the great, amazing Asian characters within the DC universe. And it's great to be, to have, Thai represented in that lineup.
Sarah Kuhn is the writer of the acclaimed graphic novel Shadow of the Batgirl, which is illustrated by artist Nicole Gu. Sarah is also the author of the popular heroine complex novels, the beloved Japan set romantic comedy, I Love You So Mochi, and the Star Wars audiobook original, Dr. Aphra. Sarah's newest novel is From Little Tokyo with Love, a modern fairy tale with a half Japanese heroine. She is also the finalist of the Cape New Writers Award and the Astounding Award for Best New Writer. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much. It's so exciting to be here. I'm so honored to get to talk to Jim Lee and with all of you. I mean, I've just been sitting here the entire time and really taking this in as like a fan. And then it was like, oh, right, I have to do something. So I will do something now and ask some questions. And, Jim, I just wanted to say that like Minh, I have really loved being part of the Young Readers line. It's been so much fun. It's been such an honor. And I feel like through that, I've been able to write stories that I think resonate, especially with young Asian American girls, which is really, really important to me. So I wanted to ask you, that's kind of what the line has meant to me. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what having that line at DC has meant to you.
Yeah, I think one of the things, comics started out as really a medium for very young children. It was disposable, right? Entertainment. And then it got a little progressively older as the fans stayed with it and then became creators themselves. And we've done a great job of kind of servicing that audience and that marketplace. But in a way, we've kind of abandoned like the younger end of things, right? Like the younger readers. And we've tried, sometimes we'll take comics and we'll use simpler vocabulary, simpler art styles, and then it wouldn't return the results that we expected. Like the audience didn't gravitate towards that. And then at the same time, we were seeing tremendous success in the YA space. Like, if you measure just the business metrics, the fastest growing piece of it in the book market was the books for young adults and middle readers. And obviously, the success of like Raina Telgemeier and it's like, whoa, like that's where the kids are. And so we came up with the strategy of tapping into people like yourself and Minh and people that had success in this marketplace. Maybe we should tailor make something for that audience. Like we shouldn't necessarily lean on our creatives and just simplify the language and the art. Like maybe there's a different way of doing it. And out of that idea came that was the genesis for our middle readers line and our YA line, really driven by, Michelle Wells, Bobby Chase at the time, Marie Javins, Jim Chadwick, Sarah Miller. I'm sure I'm missing some other people. And they brought together this really eclectic and interesting lineup of creatives that hadn't, you're an exception, I think, but a lot of them had never written, in the comic book space before. And really, and we gave them the creative freedom. This is the biggest part, to really reinvent these characters, right? They're not like, your Batgirl is, it's Cassandra Cain, but it's a different origin. You've introduced new characters. You really made it for the audience that would want to read it, right? And I think that's really exciting, and it's something that was long overdue. And so now we have a way of reaching readers 6 to 11, 13 plus, whatever, however categorize the two groups. And that's something we were missing before. And also the really important, female readership, because that is the bigger piece of it all. And our content can be very, male centric in its focus. And so I think in many ways it helps supplement what we're doing kind of in the traditional direct market space.
And you were saying, like a lot of the creators on this line were kind of updating characters. I really liked what you said to Min about how kind of evolving, both the DCU, but also other pockets of this space. Like there is a need to sort of update, to diversify, to make these characters resonate for a modern audience. But I'm just wondering for you, being such a legend in this business, having created and worked on so many like amazing iconic characters, what was it like for you when you started kind of seeing new versions of these characters? Was it exciting? Were you like, oh, that's not how I remember it? Or like, what was that experience like, just seeing like these new designs and new takes on these characters come in?
Right. I think it was, I'll tell you, at first when the art came in particularly, and it looked more like traditional art, but maybe a little softer in terms of the application of the line work. I remember Dan DiDio and I said, we're like, no, you know what, this feels too much like what we're doing. We actually wanted the line to look different, and that I think that's where Nicole came in, and the spot color, like the limited palette of it all, and the expressiveness of her line and the way she brought Cassandra to life. I think that's what it needed. It should be its own thing. It shouldn't necessarily look like a different version of what we do over here. It should be its own vibrant, creatively driven, kind of line of books. And so I was excited for that. And I think, reimagining these characters for a younger audience, Cassandra Cain has it's a pretty tough origin story. And you took elements of that and then added other elements to make it a little softer, I think, more inviting to younger readers. Jackie's a fantastic introduction to the mythology. So I think there's a lot of great stuff there that works, and we should be open to that, because when you think about the evolution of even the most iconic characters like Batman or Superman, there were a lot of twists and turns and different versions of the character. Even the the Superman radio shows had a different take on, his origin. For some random reason, I was just listening to him again, like, whoa, that's not the way I remember his origin story being and stuff. And I think that's kind of how these characters are created. It's talent sourced, but curated by the editors. So when you introduce something really cool, to me, like, we should take those cool elements and weave it into what we're doing in the sort of the comic book continuity over here. And I think that's how it should work. I think, what Min's has done with Ty is, well, is there a way to incorporate this somehow? And look, if we can bring a character back from life, we can figure out ways to incorporate this and make it make sense. So that's the way I look at it. And everything should be an inspiration and help drive the line, especially if it's a great idea.
Yeah, no, that's all really cool to hear, because I do think, superheroes are kind of our modern mythologies, right? So they those stories change depending on who's telling it or whose point of view it is, and I think that's just so interesting.
Yeah.
And I love that you say, you might want to find ways to incorporate some of these new characters into different parts of the DCU. That's something else I was going to ask about, because obviously you have characters who debuted in the line, like Min's Vietnamese American Green Lantern, or you mentioned Jackie, who is, a character Nicole and I created, who we thought was kind of the classic Asian American auntie. I really wanted Cassandra to have an older woman who was an Asian American role model, because that's something that certainly helped me in my career. So can you think of, do you think that there will ever be more of an effort to bring some of these characters into the main universe? Because I do feel like, Jack, you would have a lot of advice for all the DC.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, look, I think there's a flexibility and all. Like, I think like Superman, how many stories where both his parents are dead, or one survives, or they're both alive, and it's changed over the years. So, I like the introduction of obviously you had Batgirl in there as well, and that was kind of aligned with what was done in the direct market, the mainstream continuity of all. But Jackie as another influence, I think that's great, because in a weird way, she was very one-dimensional, I think, and it brought a different element to that character. So figuring out and like where's Batman without Alfred? And so that's the kind of thing, like you can't discount those kinds of characters and the value and what they bring to the universe. So again, I think it's just a matter of, finding the creative that has a passion for it, yourself and included, that figures out a way to bring in a version of Jackie that obviously is inspired or resonates with the one that you did in Shadow the Batgirl, but is slightly different and fits into the Cassandra Cain mythology that was created over here. And I think that's a great way of bringing readers that might discover DC through our young reader line. And then when they sort of migrate over, or if they're interested in the floppy or the comic book side of things, to find those connection points, even though they're slightly different or reflected differently, because not everything aligns 100%. So I think we welcome the fact that the writers were doing their own thing with it, with the characters, because they had an obligation to their audience to deliver something that was meaningful and entertaining to them. And it's not always necessarily the same things that drive our other audiences in other distribution pipelines.
Right. Okay. So finally, I just wanted to wrap up by asking you, this is something that kind of goes back to things you've talked about on all sections of this panel. I really loved in the beginning when you were talking with Jean about how you just kind of consumed, all geek things as a kid, like all comics, everything that was out there. I think that's a mindset that will be very familiar to all of us.
Yeah.
And so you've always been known, for just being really into all different kinds of comics, not necessarily just the thing you're creating, just the genre you're creating. And, when we were getting ready for this panel, we were kind of talking about how back in the 90s, you were sort of known for going to a lot of alternative comics events, maybe not just superheroes, which was perhaps seen as a bit unusual for, a superhero creator and artist. So I just wanted to know, where does that just curiosity come from, that desire to sort of know about all of these different things?
I think it's just, because I see myself, I think in anyone that's obsessed with something to the point where they have to do it and they congregate together, even if the content itself is very different from what I would do. I think I went to APE, and I've been to the Anime LA is what it's called. It was the big convention in LA. And then there was one in like Lancaster. I went to a bunch of different shows, and the anime stuff was driven really by my three daughters that were really into manga. They were into Tokyo Pop, and they were into that so intently. I was like, all right, I can connect with them through the love of what they're reading, but the material is so different. And I loved manga, the Tomo Akira and the Shiro Masamune, Appleseed. There were big influences to me. So, but I think I just love the fact that when people find their calling, it's unavoidable. They're almost like they can't help themselves, and I'm kind of attracted to that kind of behavior. And I think I just you want to experience that. I think, to me, the whole zine culture, it's not something that wasn't around when I was a kid, but if I knew of it, I know for sure I would have drawn comics, stapled them, and tried to sell them online, through whatever marketplace existed at the time. And so it just interests me to see all the different expressions of fandom and how powerful that can be. And to the point where I was in cosplay to Anime Expo, I think, with my kids. That was like they would read the manga and then they would create the costumes and then go to the conventions, and I dressed up as like Asuma, I think, from Naruto or something. I don't know. It was the old guy with like the cigarette. So I did that, and it just gives you insight to the diversity of fandom, because sometimes we get trapped in our own little snow globes of, and you can't see beyond it. And I think it's vital to understand that storytelling is so powerful and meaningful to people, and it's not limited to just the content that you love. And in many ways, there are bigger, arenas of storytelling that exist, or bigger groups of fandom. And in a weird way, I was just attracted and interested in learning more about these other very kind of obsessed fans that I could connect to in their fandom, but I didn't necessarily love the same material. So that was kind of the driver of it.
Very cool. Well, I think that definitely shows in what you have done with the DCU as a whole and all of these different kind of pockets of it. Thank you very much for answering a few questions. It is, again, an honor to be here. And I think now we are back to Jean.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, don't go anywhere though, Sarah. I'd like to invite Bernard and Minh back onto the virtual stage. And we're gonna end by just talking like Asians, because we're here not just to celebrate Jim, but also to celebrate Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. A question for all of us. Asian Americans are kind of having a moment right now. It's not necessarily for the best of reasons, right? The hashtag Stop Asian Hate is trending all over the place in both our social media and our news. And many Americans, not just Asian Americans, but all Americans, are finally becoming aware of Asian American issues. What sort of responsibility do you think this moment puts on our shoulders as Asian American storytellers?
And I'll jump in a little bit. And I think it's interesting during times like this as a creator, like you try to think about like what role we can play. It's something that I think about a lot when I'm talking to kids is that the underlying racism or the overt racism that's behind all of this is, as a creator, it makes you think about the fact that racism is like a profound failure of the imagination, and like how we as people who put content out there, who put out stories that celebrate our broader humanity, play a role in counteracting that failure, right? And have like fleshing out the ourselves for the broader community. So that's something that I hope as people who write stories and celebrate the power of stories, I hope that's something that we can do, and that is playing at least some role in counteracting all this.
I would say that, when I think about this, I still think of my responsibility to Asian American audiences. I don't necessarily think of it as a responsibility to a broader audience. I think of it really as a responsibility to my readers, many of whom are, young Asian American people. And in that sense, I think it's a similar thing. I want to have stories out there, both for me as a creator and by, people that I think, all of you people that I think of as my colleagues, that really show and celebrate all different kinds of experiences, that show that we can really be anything, that we can do anything. Because, I think like with something like Batgirl, like my version of Cassandra, part of her struggle is that she feels like she is not worthy of that mantle. She is not worthy of being a superhero. She is not worthy kind of being a main character. And I have certainly talked a lot about how in my real life, I did not think I was a main character for a very long time because I just never saw that. I never saw Asian Americans centered in the kinds of stories I enjoyed, or a lot of times as creators, as a kid, I think, Jim Lee was one of the few Asian American creators that I was like, wow, that's someone doing that who is like me. So I do feel that very deeply, to be able to show that variety of stories, variety of perspectives, and to really show all those kids and younger readers out, and adults like me who didn't really realize until later in life that I too could be a main character. You are important, you matter. Whatever you are going through, whatever you are doing, you are always worthy of being the main character.
Right. If I can just build on that, those great thoughts. And, to me, I think for me, it wasn't just seeing myself, but I think we need to represent these characters in a great way. I growing up, in the 70s and 80s, I was embarrassed, I think, by a lot of, like, if I saw an Asian character on TV, it was never presented in a positive light, or Charlie Chan was actually portrayed by a Caucasian actor, or, even Bruce Lee, who's super cool now, it was something that was of great embarrassment to me. And because, kids would tease me about it. And, it's just, and it's heartbreaking to think of kids that are ashamed about their culture, or who they are, how they look, or how they fit into the wider culture of it all. So I think as storytellers, we want to, present kick-ass representations of these kick-ass, Asian characters. And I think that's vital. And I think the other thing is really, we need more creatives. We need more Asians, like I was saying about kind of our mission at DC. We need to bring in wider diversity in our creative talent pool. And I think that's a big part of it. And then more broadly speaking, I just think we need more Asian leaders in general. We need, in politics, in Hollywood, obviously, in all the facets that kind of control, if you really think about it, our culture and our destiny. And, and I feel more galvanized about this than ever before. I'll just share a personal story. The other day, I've been helping my parents downsize from a 2-story house to a 1-story. My dad's like 87, my mom's 83, 84. And one of the houses that we looked at had a driveway, and the driveway just kind of blended into the driveway of the next door family. And they were like, and I could see that wouldn't feel like, it was a little awkward the way it was laid out. My dad, shared with me like, I don't think this is the right house for us, because what if the neighbors don't like Asians, and like, we're going to have these problems. And it just, kind of broke my heart to hear him, like, he gave up everything, moved here as a doctor, helped people over his entire life. And that was his first thought about, well, there are people out there that don't like Asians, and I have to be careful and be aware of that. And it just, seemed really such an antiquated or such an, awful thought to have. And it really just sort of, again, motivated me, like, we have to make a difference. And to me, the way you do that is by getting more involved, becoming decision makers, and making sure that we are represented in every facet of life and entertainment.
I think I had a story when I first got my first job drawing comics at Valiant Comics. Bob Layton was my mentor, Bob being another legend in comics. Halfway through my first assignment, which is a fill-in issue, Bob came to me and said, "Bernard, we want you to draw a monthly book, and we're going to launch it with a #1 issue. And would you like to be the artist?" I was 20. I had a lot of cojones back then. I said, "Bob, I will draw this book on one contingency." He said, "What is that, Bernard?" I said, "If you make the lead an Asian American male who didn't know Kung Fu, but was a lover, not a fighter." And, and it became a book called Dr. Mirage, but I think it's also, like you said, Jim, taking risks, being observant, absorbing everything, but also taking risks, and being able to put yourself out there in order to create characters that represent us and that aren't stereotypical, but are wide-ranging.
That's actually a great lead into announcing a book that we are all involved in, everybody on this panel, and we're all proud of. DC Festival of Heroes will be debuting this May, just in time for Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. What does this book mean to us as creators, as Asian American creators?
Well, Gene and I get to work on we create a new character called Monkey Prince, and thanks to Jessica and Gene, I mean, it's loosely based on Monkey King. And as a kid, as an immigrant growing up in the States here, I read a lot of American comics, but I didn't know how to read Chinese. And so my dad saw that I took a liking to all these, superheroes. And he said, I got a Chinese superhero. And he started reading to me bedtime stories about the Monkey King. And so I would go to sleep and dream about these wondrous worlds and adventures. And to be able to create a new character based off of that legendary mythology is a life dream come true. So,
I'm excited for this because it's shocking to me that it's the first time we've done this in 80 plus years that DC has been around. I want to thank the editor Jessica Chen, really her brainchild and really a force of nature that brought this together. And as excited as I am for this first issue, this debut issue, I know that we're probably going to do this every year, and it's just going to grow as a program. And so I'm really excited for that. And if this can inspire young people to want to become creatives themselves, I feel like that's something that has become a big part of like what I do now, is like the work is great. It entertains people. People look up to the content, but it can also be very transformative. It can inspire people to become creatives, not necessarily comic book artists or writers, but just anything in the creative arts. And I think that's vital, especially amongst Asians where, you're a failure if you don't become like a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. So I look forward to the generations of comic book fans that this inspires and brings into the industry.
And I also wanted to make sure that we mention also, obviously the wonderful Jessica Chen, but also the wonderful Andrea Shea, who was, I think, her partner in crime editor on this, and was kind of the person that brought me into it. I got to write a story about Amiko Queen, a Red Arrow, and that's with the marvelous Victoria Ying doing the art. And that was really cool because I think it might be the first time I have written a half Japanese comic book character, which is what I am. And that was very exciting. But I wanted to especially mention Andrea because, both Andrea and Sarah Miller, who was my amazing editor on Shadow of the Batgirl, remembered my failed application to the DC Writers Workshop years ago. And they both mentioned that when we got to work together. And I think that really speaks to kind of what has come up a few times here about not just the importance of having, us as creators come into it, but also having gatekeepers who understand why it's important to have that authenticity, to have the diversity of voices, to, kind of remember someone's failed application from years ago that they're like, oh, what about that person? Or when, I just come across their desk, they remember me. So I think that is something that's very important too in making, these characters and these brands and these heroes into sort of modern versions of themselves. So yeah, for me, it was just really exciting for all of those reasons to get to work on it, to work with Jess, to work with Andrea, Victoria. It was all just so much fun.
Yeah, for me, it was great to revisit and introduce Tai and his grandmother again and get to do a short story with Trung Le Nguyen, who's such an amazing Vietnamese artist. And just the idea that there are enough Asian American superheroes to have an anthology is kind of mind-blowing to me, that there's this whole constellation of superheroes out there now that didn't necessarily exist to this extent when we were kids. Like Jim, you mentioned what this is going to mean to a new generation of creators. I feel like there's readers now are starting at so much further ahead than we were when we were kids, that it makes me excited to think about, like you said, where they're going to take the storytelling in this next generation. So it just makes me excited to think about the readers and the seeds that it's planting in the next generation of books that are to come.
Absolutely. I thank you, Sarah.
I'm so excited. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I was just thanking Sarah for reminding me the other sort of partner in crime that Jessica had.
Yeah,
so
that's right. I was going to say, I'm so excited about this book, not just as a creator, but also as a fan. Like Bernard said, the Monkey King, the Monkey Prince story that we're doing, which is based on the legend of the Monkey King, is a bucket list item for me. I think many of us who grew up with Monkey King stories have always wanted to marry him with Western superhero traditions. And this is our way of doing it in the DC universe. And Sarah mentioned how, how you never saw yourself as a main character in any of the stories that you grew up in. And Minh talked about how racism really is this failure of imagination. I think this book covers both of those things, right? This is a book full of imagination with characters who are like us as main characters. That's something that would have blown my mind when I was a 10-year-old, for sure. Well, I think that about wraps up our time. I want to thank Jim. I want to thank all of you, but especially Jim. I think
you guys
just I have to say, I think being a teenager and seeing you progress through your career, seeing the comics that you created, they provided endless amounts of inspiration for me. I really genuinely think that your example changed the course of my life. It gave me a different way of talking about comics with my parents, with my immigrant parents. So I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank Sarah and Minh and Bernard for joining me here, and also to the Library of Congress for hosting this amazing event.
Thank you, Gene.
Yeah, thank you, Gene. Look, and thank you guys. Like, really, this has been an incredible experience, and I look forward to seeing you guys and thanking you all in person, hopefully very soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
This was
you.
such a
Thank
great
you.